Hello, everyone, and welcome to another edition of the Science Friday Book Club live stream. My name is Diana. I am the Experiences Manager from Science Friday, joining you from cloudy Brooklyn, New York. It's officially spring, and the showers are here. Well, thank you so much for joining us, no matter where you are joining us from. Speaking of which, we want to know, where are you joining us from? You can go into the chat and let us know right now. We have a few people who have already started to let us know. By the way, you do need a YouTube account to sign in to chat with us in the chat. So you can spend some time doing that. Usually just a Google account will suffice. We have people joining from Columbia, Maryland, Arizona, Manchester, New Hampshire, Philadelphia, Bergen County, New Jersey. Thank you all so much for coming out. Keep letting us know where you are from in the chat. If you don't know us, Science Friday is your one-stop shop for all things science news. We're well known for our weekly science radio show, which is broadcast every week on, you guessed it, Fridays at 2 p.m. Eastern. You can listen to us live on your local radio station or by visiting us at sciencefriday.com and clicking the listen banner that is at the top of our website. But today we are talking about this month's book club pick, which was Legacy, a Black physician reckons with racism in medicine, which reveals Uché Blackstock's experiences with systemic racism as a Black doctor and discusses the barriers to adequate healthcare for Black Americans. And if you want to join fellow readers to discuss this and our other book club picks together, you can do so on our community space, which is hosted on Mighty Networks. And you can join us with a link in the chat, which I will post in just a second. So, a kindly reminder to everyone who is joining us as we get started. Science Friday is committed to providing a welcoming and harassment-free environment for members of all ethnicities, ages, gender and trans statuses, sexual orientations, physical abilities, national origin, beliefs, and any other dimension of diversity. We've created a code of conduct, which you can read in its entirety on our community space if you join us there. And it helps us create a safe and positive community experience for all. We believe that providing clear expectations is a necessary part of building a respectful community. So here are the basics. Be supportive and respectful when speaking with one another and asking questions in the chat. Share generously and listen closely. You could add thoughts whenever in the chat, even if they aren't strictly questions for our guests. And it's best to if you respond to what others are saying. We're going to stay on topic as we're here to discuss this month's book club pick, which again is Legacy by Dr. Uché Blackstock, and closely related topics. So we'll talk about some of the science and the history and the various things included in this book. And we reserve the right to ban anyone who engages in demeaning, discriminatory, or harassing behavior in the chat today. Okay, that is my entire spiel. So thank you for sticking with me. With that, it is time to welcome onto the stage our author for today's live stream. So please welcome Dr. Uché Blackstock. She is an emergency physician based in Brooklyn, New York, the founder and CEO of Advancing Health Equity, and the author of Legacy, a Black physician reckons with racism in medicine. Dr. Blackstock, thank you so much for being here with us today.
Thanks so much, Diana. Thank you to everyone in the Sci Friday Book Club. And I'm so excited to be here chatting with you about Legacy.
Well, a kind reminder to our audience, we are going to be taking questions in the chat. So anytime during the event, if you have questions, comments, thoughts, feelings, you want to put them in the chat for Dr. Blackstock, put them there. We will get to as many as we possibly can. And thank you in advance. So, Uché, I would love for you to start with just a section of, would you mind doing a reading from your book?
Yes, I'm going to do a reading. It's just a paragraph, but I feel like it's a paragraph that really tells you a lot about myself and the book. My sister and I were only 19 years old in 1997 when we lost our mother to leukemia, and she was just 47. She died too young, but by then her influence had indelibly rubbed off on us. Our mother's passion for learning, her dogged perseverance, and her commitment to serving her community heavily influenced our own decisions to become physicians. Oni and I both graduated from Harvard University and then attended Harvard Medical School, the school's first Black mother-daughter legacy graduates. Like her, we both went to work with historically underserved populations after graduating. My sister at a hospital in the Bronx, while I went to train at Kings County SUNY Downstate in Brooklyn, following in our mother's footsteps. In the years since then, I have felt her by my side in so many of my own interactions with patients. Her ability to listen to and truly care continues to be a model for me. And it's something that our patients are crying out for now more than ever.
Thank you. I feel like you've actually set me up for a question that I feel like is sort of peppered throughout the book. You've called the book Legacy. You talk about the different definitions of legacy. There is just one, right? You and your sister both followed your mother into medicine. What different versions of legacy do you explore in this book?
Yes, yes. So I feel like, the most obvious one is being a second generation physician, but it's just so much more than that. Because obviously, um, as a Black woman physician, it's still in 2024 a very rare thing for me to be able to even say that. So another thing that I pull into the book is this. Is the numbers, the fact that, even though the US population is 13% Black, that less than 6% of all physicians are Black and less than 3% are Black women. And so I use the book to talk a lot about, like, what are the policies, organizational and larger policies that have contributed to those numbers. So that's one legacy. The other legacy is the legacy, and it's actually connected. It was a legacy of medical racism, is essentially providing, history, based in our country, about why, again, in 2024, we see the racial health inequities that we see, why we see the high maternal mortality rate, why we see infant mortality or low life expectancy, especially for Black people and Black men. So really one little idea of legacy to this larger idea of legacy, as a way to explain these appalling statistics that we see today, and to really explain that why and how they're so deeply rooted in the history of our country.
One of the things that I feel like we're talking about in our community space is that your book does this really well of combining the personal and sort of the scientific, the statistics, the history. Can you tell us a little bit about how you found space for all of those things? It seems like you kind of fit in a lot.
I know. I know. People have read it. They're like, oh my goodness, there's so much information in there. Well, one, I just wanted to make sure that anyone who read this book, whether they were in medicine, in healthcare, love science, had nothing to do with any of the above, could actually learn something from this book, that there was a tidbit of information that they could walk away and say, wow, I just learned something new. And I know that often, when we talk about statistics or we talk about history, it can be inaccessible for some people, just the way that, especially, if I was in academics, in our silos, how we talk about some of these issues. I really was very intentional about making sure to weave the personal, and the professional and the statistics and the history in a way that made the material accessible to the reader. So yes, so every chapter that I would write, and sometimes there were some chapters it was harder to do than others. Like some chapters were just like more about me, but my personal life, right? And some chapters were a little bit heavier on the statistics, but I felt like overall the book in its entirety that had a nice balance of both.
I agree. And again, so did our readers. I feel like that's one of the things we've been mentioning is this balance that you did. And your writing style is I would describe it as like emotional but clear and straightforward. Like you do talk about these like really poignant moments in your life, um, uh, you know, being admitted to the hospital and going through a near death experience. I mean, it's an incredibly emotional time. Did You've written before? You've written uh, for articles and op-eds before, and you sort of transitioned into writing this book. Did writing that way help you sort of develop your voice that ended up on the page for Legacy?
Yes, and actually, when I would say I think it was in 2018, I took a writing workshop for op-eds. It was sponsored by the Op-Ed Project, which
Mm.
is a nonprofit organization that essentially gives people the opportunity to develop their writing skills. And what's really wonderful about op-eds is that it is a way to make your message accessible, and it helps you to develop a cogent argument about whether it's a piece of information, something new, something old, anyway, something that is timely and relevant, and how to
Mhm.
bring that forward to the public in a way to see or to explain to them that this is something you should care about. And so I had written a few op-eds. I wrote about the diversity initiatives at Harvard Medical School. I actually wrote an op-ed about when I left academic medicine, which I write about in the book. I had a 10-year career in academic medicine. I thought I was going to stay as a faculty member forever. And it was really my own professional experiences I had as a Black woman physician in that environment that really were very transformative for me. And I left. So anyway, after I left, I wrote an op-ed. So I left, and then like a month later, my op-ed was published in Stat News, and that actually went like mini viral. It actually went viral.
I remember
And
it, yeah.
and people were like, whoa, like what is this? And at the time when I wrote it, I thought I wrote it because I felt like I needed to get out this experience that I was having, that I knew I felt very lonely when I was having it, but I felt like it wasn't it wasn't a rare experience. And
Mhm.
in that piece, I pulled together not only my experience, but I pulled together a lot of data. I pulled together data from a lot of medical journals, that I had been reading all along, to really kind of helped not bolster, but help shape the piece. And I found that was really gave it a sort of gravitas that it wouldn't have otherwise. Otherwise, people would say, "Oh, that was like an essay that you wrote," but no. But I literally had like 20 different sources in this article, in this op-ed.
Yeah, so even when you're doing an op-ed, you're still pulling it's like the scientific way, right? Like, we're still pulling
Right.
this research, you're still referring to it, giving people access to those things. I can't imagine you doing an op-ed any other way, honestly.
Yeah, and
Um,
I see Lindsay asked who published the op-ed again. It's Stat, STAT, Stat News, and Stat is like a publication for like healthcare, biopharma, and has a lot of really great health information. And then I also see Donita. Do you mind? Yeah, Diane, do you
no,
mind? Okay,
please, I don't mind at all.
okay, mentions that they listened to the audiobook and felt I put a lot of emotion into my reading. Yes. And I can I just say I really love I loved recording the audiobook.
What's
It
the
was
experience? I feel like this isn't offered to so many authors.
actually it's interesting because I feel like if you write a memoir, then it should be something that is part of your contract. Like I don't see, other than I know Britney Spears with her memoir, she had Michelle Williams narrate it, but because Britney Spears doesn't have the time. Anyway, all that to
Yeah.
say is it was super exciting. I went into the studio for like 4 to 5 days over like a 2 month period, for about 4 hours, and I recorded chunks of the book. And it actually made me fall in love with my book again. And it actually also made me see things that I would have changed, because even though before I submitted the final manuscript, you do usually read it out loud, but there's something different about reading it out loud in a studio, and just hearing that audio feedback. It was a lot of fun, and I actually sometimes recommend people get the audiobook. A lot of people have purchased both the hardcover and the audiobook.
That's so nice. It's like it must be nice to have, people wanting to experience your book in so many different
Yeah,
ways.
and people have said that they felt with the audiobook they connected to me more, because they can
Mhm.
hear me talking and how my voice may change in talking about different experiences that I write about in the book.
Yeah, I can imagine. Um, well, you spend the book doing this, but I do wanna give people who might not have been able to read your book or haven't finished it yet, just kind of a summary. Can you just talk a little bit about how racism affects the medical system and people's experience with healthcare? Like, how far down does this go? Is this from, like, the even just, like, trying to get an appointment to landing in the hospital and needing emergency care?
So I think the breadth of it is quite staggering, and just even in how you ask the question. I think the way that I wrote the book really was about actually my own journey from child to medical student to resident to practicing physician, and this awakening and that I had in terms of recognizing the educational gaps in my own experience. So this process of unlearning and relearning. And so it really wasn't until I was a resident in a public hospital. So after medical school, you do your residency where you have your MD, your medical degree, but you still are practicing under a supervising physician. You're kind of actually learning. It's interesting. I feel like it's during residency that you actually learn, practically speaking, how to be a doctor. In medical school, you're doing a lot of classes. You may have to see some patients, but no one's giving you any direct responsibility of taking care of anyone. But it really was as a resident physician that at this public hospital where I saw all my patients coming in and where I noticed that like the diseases that they have, whether it was poorly controlled diabetes or uncontrolled high blood pressure, that it was really less about like the individual decisions that they were making regarding their care, but what we were seeing was a result of systemic factors, whether it be poverty, inequality, racism, because I know, because, and this is what I had to learn along the way, is that a lot of the communities that my patients were from, they were actually from formerly redlined communities or communities where there had been discriminatory housing policies. What that does to a community is that it essentially sucks the resources out of that community. People aren't able to purchase property, businesses don't come. If businesses don't come, jobs don't come. What goes towards funding schools, property taxes? So you don't get a quality education. All of those are what we call the social determinants of health, right? So education, employment, access to healthy foods, housing, all of that impacts health. And so I had made this realization that like what I was seeing in terms of my patients' health was a direct impact of the communities that they were living, working, loving, praying in. But then also once they come and interface with the healthcare establishment, they also have to deal with a lot. So, we have studies that show that, Black patients are often spoken over during their, appointments with clinicians, that the way that pain is treated, there are disparities in how pain is treated. And I talk about my own experience in medical school where I had the misdiagnosed appendicitis. But even during that experience, I was told by the doctors that I didn't really seem to be in that much pain. But we have a lot of data that shows that Black patients, because of how racism is so deeply rooted in this country, that there are the ideas that we are biologically different. And some of those ideas are actually taught, whether explicitly or implicitly, in medical school. And I get into that when I talk about how even for kidney function, I learned that there were two sets of normal values for kidney function. There was a function that Black people had and non-Black people. It was never explained why there were different normal values. And just so everyone listening understands, that was based on a deeply rooted myth that Black people had higher muscle mass. And that correlates with the glomerular filtration rate. All that to say is that correlates with how kidney function is measured. But what that did actually over the last decades, what that has done to have those different set of normal values, it has delayed specialty kidney care for Black patients, because it says that having a higher kidney function, kidney value, that's actually normal, and it wasn't normal. So it actually has led to disparities in who gets kidney care, who gets placed on the kidney transplant list. And some of the largest kidney organizations now actually have to go back. Actually have to go back to on their transplant lists to find out patients that were not put on the transplant list years ago and get them placed on the list, or call them and say, we're actually ready for you. So that's just an example of how, what I learned in medical school, I didn't understand why there were these differences, but you internalize, okay, that must mean that Black bodies are different than non-Black bodies. And that has impacted how people receive care. So so that's just some example. I see Lindsay put, our GFR test just got changed to not report that this past year in our lab. So I'm so happy to see that there's been a lot of advocacy by nephrologists who are kidney doctors. So my mother was a nephrologist. She was a kidney doctor. There've been a lot of advocacy by nephrologists, over the last few years, working with their national professional organizations, working with hospitals to change those, to change those quote unquote normal values, and just to have one normal value for everybody.
Yeah. And like you said, this is just it's just one example, right? It's sort of like it shows us how this is like sort of pervasive throughout the
Yes.
system, both in the way that possibly Black people picture themselves when they go into a medical institution. They've been told this as well. The doctors have been told this. They've been taught this. They continue to teach these things, and so it's like it's kind of throughout the whole system. And so we have a question
Hmm.
from the audience here. Let's see. It is from Lindsay, who says, um, well, it's a question and also a statement that I will rephrase into a question. I like that Dr. Blackstone stood up, Blackstock stood up for herself often, because who else was going to do it for her? Yeah,
Yeah.
would love to see more
Well,
opportunities
actually,
for
no,
people
I
of
know who else
color.
will, but okay, no, go
Yeah,
ahead, go ahead, go ahead.
would love to see opportunities for people of color to be doctors and in positions of leadership in the medical field. Which I also want to sort of ask. So we think about changing the system partly by putting by welcoming more people into the system, right? We like there are less women and Black women in these fields. If we
Mhm.
welcome them into the fields, perhaps there will be change. What we find sometimes by studying this sort of like pipeline is that people think of it as a leaky pipeline, right? Like we bring people into the field, but the problem is that the pipe is still broken, and so these people who we've welcomed into the system are, you know, there's still racist practices, there are still sexist practices throughout the field, and that they kind of leak out. And so, you talk a little bit about this at the end of your book about ways you hope that this pipeline
Yes.
will sort of be fixed. What's one way that you're sort of like really looking forward to
Yeah,
seeing the systemic problems being
so many ways.
addressed?
One way, okay,
I
so
know.
one way. Okay, so that's, I mean, one way. So yeah, and so this leaky pipeline you talk about. Um, so if so, for the example that obviously from my book is that I went from assistant to associate professor, and then I actually left academia. And actually, when you look at some of the statistics, you see that for a lot of women, a lot of faculty of color, like people will leave before they become full professor. And a lot of it is because of like the stories like I share in the book, where you feel like you're in an environment where you want it to be like, I love academia because of the clinical work, the teaching, the research. It's just such an intellectually stimulating environment, but I really didn't get the support that I needed. And I thought it was just me, but once I shared my story, I realized there was so many people. But just like even mentoring is so incredibly important to determining how successful someone's career will be. And often, we have data that show that people are more likely to choose people who look like them to mentor. So we really have to think about mentorship as a more formalized process. Like I talk about how I had to go out of my department to internal medicine. I found a more senior white woman who, in internal medicine, who actually mentored me. It was just I'm so deeply grateful. We actually email still. I'm so deeply grateful that she took me under her wing. But if I didn't have her, I would have floundered even more. But I felt like it would have been helpful to know, like, okay, am I doing this right? Is this a research project I should start? Is this a grant I should apply for? So mentorship is one thing that's really critical, that's often lacking in a lot of our academic institutions.
And you talk about mentorship in the other direction too, right? You had students who would come to you sort of hoping that you would be their mentors, but you also, as a person in a position of power sort of above them, found it was really difficult to
I
help
know.
them.
Like so I also felt like, obviously I wanted to be there for our students and our trainees, like the ones that are residents. I wanted to be there for them because they were having these experiences where, they didn't feel like anyone else could understand. They would come right to me. But the fact is that there were so few of me that I had like the disproportionate burden of mentoring these young people. And that's why when I ended up leaving academia, I did feel very guilty about it, because I said, part of my role is to be their mentor, but part of bringing in more diverse faculty is so that we can have a faculty that can adequately mentor and supervise a student population that looks like them.
Yeah. Um, Phyllis here has a question. I'm going to focus on one part of it. Given the cost of obtaining an MD and the distrust of some, how do you think getting more Black people into the field, like what sort of should be the process for that? But I want to focus on the distrust part of this.
Mhm.
So, there have been multiple studies and ways that distrust sort of brews between the medical institutions and um, Black people as both just people, but also specifically as patients. Um, I'm wondering what you'd hope would be sort of the first step for, let's say,
Mhm.
the um, medical curriculum of people who like build the medical curriculum in medical schools to sort of start to repair some of that distrust.
Yeah. You know what? I actually think that so a lot of what I advocate is to really have more community centered participation, engagement. And
Mm,
so I would love if we thought about bringing in, our patients, bringing in people from the community to really think about like what are things that a first year medical student should know, right? Like what are the core things if you're going to be interacting with certain communities, right? What are the pieces of history or even what are the kind of relationships that are important. So there's certain communities, the church is very important, right? And other communities that like there are other community-based organizations. But I think what it's about is how do we engender trust before, for example, a pandemic hits. And when a pandemic hits, then you're trying to get everyone vaccinated, and people are like, "I don't know who you are. This hospital's been in my neighborhood, and they haven't really engaged with us, right? They haven't
mhm.
even they've just kind of been there. And I come here if I need something, but a lot of times I don't come because I don't know who these people are. So I know that, getting community members and paying and compensating them to like you really their experiences are a gift. They really are a gift and can help in hospitals and clinics really serve them better. So I would love to see more community centered work. I know some hospitals have community members on their boards, like,
Mm.
and I think that is just so incredibly important because who do you really listen to? You have to listen to your patients.
I'm seeing so much of that kind of work popping up, especially in health related fields like environmental epidemiology that studies, how environmental factors might affect people's health. Um, I've seen so many research labs doing more of that work, and I think it's really important. And I don't know too many medical labs or hospitals that are doing that work, but we did do a study of, or we did do a story on our radio program about a hospital that was working directly with deaf patients to sort of build a community connection to the hospitals that are local to create more resources for both the medical field, but also for the patients. And I think it's like these stories are just so important, and the more we talk about them, also hopefully the more that people in the medical field will consider starting up a program at their institutions.
Yeah, and I love how you say like the community connection. That piece is just so important because we know that, I know in like 2020 when we were trying to get health information out to certain communities that it was really important that we were using trusted messengers so that we were using either
Mm,
people from church or from barbershops or hair salons or from organizations that were already deeply embedded in those
mhm.
communities. So they weren't just strangers that were showing up, that we know there are people who actually had felt accountable and felt obligated to ensuring they're providing accurate and important information to community members.
So we asked our online community members about their personal experience with the healthcare system,
Yeah.
and they answered via poll. And so the scale was from very positive to very negative, basically five answers with neutral in the middle. And 50% of people answered generally positive. About
Mhm.
15% were neutral, and about 15% had a negative experience with the healthcare system. Do you think that our community sort of represents the sort of experience of Americans at large, or are we a little lucky in that 50% positive?
Yeah, I mean, I think you're a little bit lucky just because I know some of the data, and I know some of the more data that's more focused on certain communities, especially Black patients, and I
Mhm.
would say that majority, especially of recent studies done like by Kaiser Family Foundation and other similar organizations, find that patients feel that they have experienced unfair treatment, mistreatment, or bias by their health professionals. Like the majority, like literally, like sometimes in the 80s, sometimes in the 90s, when we're talking about like, do you feel like bias influenced how your pain was treated or how you were listened to? So yeah, so I would definitely love to see like what that breakdown, if it was just disaggregated of the racial and ethnic demographic, and even gender wise as well, because we know that people who identify as women often will say they're not listened to as well, or they're often more gaslit by their health professionals.
Yeah, I from personal experience can also say that that is
Yeah,
true for me as well.
and
Um,
I just want to say, I see Lily said, just said, I love this question about your distrust question. I believe the medical distrust is perpetuated in the classroom of medical students. And yeah, I mean, this is something that I write about in the book, that really it's up to our medical schools and learning institutions to do some like deep self-reflection on how are they teaching about different patient populations, like what are we leaving out, one, but also what are we also including that is biased information. And so again, I do agree that with what Lily pointed out, that this distrust can be perpetuated on the side of how we are educated and training our health professionals.
yeah. Um, I would love to talk a little bit about the work you do these days. So, like you said, you sort of through the book, you work us through being a child, growing up in Brooklyn, going to Harvard for medical school, coming back to New York, being working in academia, becoming a ER physician, and now you have a advocacy and consulting company called Advancing Health Equity. What is the day-to-day? I mean, I'm sure every day is so different for you, but I
Yeah.
wonder just like if you can give us like a slice of the pie, just give us like what is every day kind of or could look like for this work that you're doing?
Every day is really different, but it's very flexible, and it's a lot of really wonderful work that we do both virtually and in person with healthcare and related organizations. So we work with, I won't say who our specific clients are, but we work with departments of health, city, state departments of health. We work with nonprofits. We work with academic medical centers. Some biopharma companies, but basically organizations that are looking to transform their organizational culture into one that can support health equity, that can kind of think more critically about how do we deliver care in a way that's equitable to all patients. And so we do everything from trainings to organizational assessments or program evaluations around health equity and racial equity. We do leadership coaching as well for healthcare leaders so that they are thinking about work through an equity lens. And so it's a lot of the work that I actually wanted to do within academia that I did not have the freedom to do it in that way, in a way that was authentically aligned with my values. And so there's probably some selection bias in terms of like who chooses us. Like there are a lot of the organizations that want to do the really hard work. And this is work that often we think of our client organizations as our partners, because we say like this is it's a marathon and not a sprint. And really to change the culture of organization takes a while. So we're in this for the long run with them. I did notice that DK wrote, it happens in the pharmaceutical industry. I think this is about
Mm.
just the lack of diversity in clinical trials have been mainly performed on white men. How can these results translate to women and people of color? So yes, so some of the companies that we work with, are biopharma companies that we talk to about, how can they increase the diversity of those that they have in their clinical trials? Like, how can we look at certain neighborhoods? How can we think about interacting with patients? What does the messaging sound like? Because for some people, when they hear about participating in a clinical trial, it actually sounds quite scary to them. Like, what, you're experimenting on me, am I a guinea pig? But the studies actually show that when patients are given really full information about what what they are being asked to do, that actually Black and Hispanic patients are more likely to sign up for clinical trials than other patients, because they actually see the work that they're doing, is a contribution to improving society. And so I thought that was so beautiful. So really what it's about is making sure that we're creating an environment where people are where they have the information they need to make an informed decision about participating, but then also, where are the clinical trial sites? Are they in an area that is easily accessible? Are we going to make sure that people have the funds to get to that site, right? So covering travel, covering meals, just how can we make it as easy as possible for a diverse patient population to participate in a given trial?
And I imagine some of the changes that are probably happening with these clinical trials is the, like, reporting back to the community as well. This wasn't a thing 10, 15, 20 years ago as much as I'm sure it is now. Are you finding that more, if you're working with anyone on like a clinical trial consulting, are they ever like, oh yeah, I guess we should be doing that? Is that sort of like
Yeah,
a new thing for some people?
yeah, yeah. No, definitely. I think that piece, that like the two-way communication piece, is really important, and they're seeing that importance of that. The other thing I've noticed is a lot of these organizations are actually working with people in physicians that are based in the community, who have their practices in the community, that family docs that have been there for years. And so I think that actually is even better, because you have people who they already have a relationship with this doctor or this health professional, and can and trust them already.
We have a question from one of the people in the live stream chat. How's your work being affected by the backlash against DEI initiatives? So we're seeing like actual political stances against some of these things. Do you find
Yeah.
your work is already being affected, or is it more of like kind of a grandstanding right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think we probably have not seen the extent to which it will be impacted. I do think that it's something that I'm very concerned about, especially because in 2020 there were a lot of organizations that not only created roles but put funding within their organization towards DEI. And then I think for people to understand that, like, what DEI initiatives do is they create more diverse, inclusive workplaces, right? But they also are thinking about, what does the pipeline look like? What does the external facing work that we're doing with our communities look like? And I think within health, you know, it's so incredibly important, because we're talking about life versus death of our patients. Like, this is not something that, you can say this is not a big deal. No, this is a big deal, because we know, as I write in the book, when there is racial concordance, meaning when clinicians, especially for people of color, when there are clinicians and the patients that come from the same background, they actually have better outcomes. There are better outcomes. People are more likely to leave the interaction with a positive affect. They're more likely to follow prevention measures. They're more likely to get their vaccine. So I think that it's really important that, I know from my take on it, our medical professional organizations have been coming out to say that they believe equitable care for all patients are important. And I think most of them are supporting the programs that we have in place. And we need to continue to support them, because if we don't, we can actually compromise the care that we deliver to our patients.
I'm very glad to hear that you aren't seeing any kind of reluctancy or like worry around that. It's like what
Yeah.
you would hope for the work that you're
And I
doing,
think
that
I
people
think
are.
I think organizations are digging in more, like, no, we want to do this work. This is so important.
Yeah, I love that. Um, did you uh consider any careers that wasn't medicine?
Um, I actually, if I mean, one of the other careers that I considered is, I didn't really write about this in the book, but I would love to be a photojournalist. I was
Hmm.
a photographer and journalist for for the Harvard Crimson. So I found that really exciting, just sort of documenting stories and getting to know people, and I love taking pictures. But I just felt I felt this strong calling to medicine. So here I am.
I love that. I mean, we always advocate for the combination of science and art, and so
Yes.
if you're
I
ever able to combine your two loves, I am sure that the people here would be really supportive and follow you there.
Thank you for that. I needed that nudge. I needed that nudge, definitely.
I'm very bad at hobbies, so I'm just advocating everyone else to do hobbies. I cannot practice what I preach quite yet, but
Yeah.
one day
Okay.
I'll have a hobby. I really like this question from Jay. Can you say more about the advice your mom gave regarding self care?
Oh yeah. So Jay, thank you so much for asking about that question. So that was from a conversation that I had with my mom. One of those very difficult conversations I had with my mom when she was ill, and I was still in college, and we only had months left. But one thing she told me was, even when you have your children and your career, you take care of yourself. And I think what I didn't realize at that time, I was only 19 years old. I'm like, what is she talking about? But now I'm 46. The year my mom was when she was diagnosed. I have two small children. I have my own organization. I'm managing a lot, and you know, I think probably as a 19-year-old, I couldn't see my mother in all her fullness that she was, and the importance really of like taking some time out for yourself. But I definitely always keep that in mind now with everything that I have to be responsible for.
Yeah. Are you still running as well?
Oh no,
I have
I just stopped running a few years ago because of my knees. Like when you get to a certain age, you don't recover from your runs. And so I went to my sports rehab doctor, and he's like, Uche, I'm sorry, you're gonna have to do some low impact. So I have an exercise bike, and I do a lot of strength training because
oh,
apparently also after your 40s, for people who identify as women, often you will lose lean muscle. So actually weight training is very, very important, and you don't have to do as much cardio is important, but not as much as eating lots of protein and doing weight training.
amazing. I'm very glad to hear. Well, can you tell us a little bit about the experience of writing this book? What did you find that it was cathartic, taxing, rewarding, all
it
of
was
the
all
above, other things?
It was all of that. No, I'm kidding. No, I mean, I don't think I've poured. I mean, I joke and say this is my third child. This book is my third child because I don't think I ever put so much energy or just focus. I had a lot of like it was an emotionally exhausting process. I think also because it's a memoir. So I felt like I was giving a lot of myself, my family stories, sharing my family, that vulnerability part. But then also obviously doing the research was also took a lot of time as well. I was so happy when we had the final manuscript and I gave it to my editor. I was like, and she's like, yes, she signed off on it. But it just is a really exhilarating experience. I think that once the book came out and the positive reception that it's received has really reaffirmed like the reason why I even wanted to write the book in the first place. That I feel like one, we all have stories um, to share, and there are different ways of sharing our stories. This was my way of sharing my own family story as well as my professional experiences to bring to light this issue that means so much to me.
Was there one of those like awards or accolades that really sort of like hit home and you were like, oh, that's not what I expected?
Oh, you mean like a comment or tell me, can you tell me more what you mean?
Like maybe hitting the New York Times bestseller
Oh yeah,
list
yeah,
within a week of publication. Like, yeah, I'm wondering,
yeah.
like,
Yeah, I
that's
mean, it's so
impressive.
interesting. Yeah, so one thing,
Oh,
people who are close to me, if you came into my room, you would see that like on my mirror, I have post-its, and my post-its have like different affirmations on them. And one of my post-its was New York Times bestseller. And I would say that to myself every day. Every day I would say, you're gonna be New York Times bestseller. And it wasn't because like I wanted the book. It wasn't necessarily even because of me. It was because I wanted it to signal to the publishers, to the public, that people care so deeply about racial health inequities and that people are committed to wanting to make a difference. So it was more that I was like, yes, 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 people get it. Yeah.
yeah, yeah, it's exactly that. You're very right. It is both like the it signals something in sort of the society and in the air like as much as it is like a recognition of the incredibly hard work and very well written book that you have put out into the world. So I love that.
Thank
Um,
you.
I wonder about the importance of ending chapter 15 in the way that you did. So the last chapter of the book, you have a series of calls to action for
Mhm.
specific people within the field, but also just like people who are living in the world. Um, was that a place you knew that you were going to take the book in the end, or did it feel like as you were finishing up, you were like, I just feel like I need to point out these very specific things and make it very easy for people to be like, that's what I should be
No,
doing.
no, I knew that I knew that I wanted to have a call to action chapter. I remember talking to my editor and just being like, I really want to leave people with hard instructions. And I feel like that's just me. Like I love a checklist. Like I love a checklist.
Same.
So, and I'm going to make it as easy as possible for people that, because a lot of times people would read something like this and say, well, hey, what do I do now? I don't know what to do. And I'm like, no, I'm going to give you plenty of suggestions for what you can do. And I'm going to talk to different audiences also. I'm going to talk to different groups. So everyone knows like what to do. No one can say, oh, I didn't know. I could say, oh yeah, turn to page, turn to page, chapter 11, page, whatever, so just make sure that people know that there really is, everyone can make a difference. Everyone.
I said this before. Sometimes people say things that kind of like hit the point of the event, and I say, that's all we've got time for. You wrapped it up perfectly. Thank you so much for being here. We got to so many amazing questions from our
Yeah,
audience. You've
the
spent so
audience.
much time. I know it always happens. I'm never like surprised, but I'm always delighted that our audience comes out in droves and they ask these amazing questions. So thank you, audience, for your just stupendous questions tonight. Thank you, Dr. Blackstock, for being here and for talking with us about your book. One last question, though. What's next? You've done all of these things, and I hate to ask it, but because I'm sure you were like, I'm tired. I'm still talking about the
I
book.
know.
But what are you sort of focused? What are you excited about next for the next
Well,
few months or
so
weeks?
two things. Oh, well, so actually, I'm actually meeting with my literary agent to talk about. We're having dinner to celebrate, but I also want to talk to her about just second book ideas. I know. For a while, I didn't
I
even want to talk
love
about
it. I'm excited.
second book ideas, but I want it to be more solutions oriented, and to really elevate some of the community groups that are doing really wonderful work. And then I'm also talking about a docu-series, maybe a limited series that touches upon different
Cool.
health inequities that we see in our communities and some of the solutions that are happening on the ground.
Amazing. We will look forward to that, and
Yeah.
I can't wait to have you back on Science Friday to talk about it. So
Thank you,
thank
Dan. I'm
you.
so glad that we
Oh,
got to connect again, and thank you for having me, and thank you for choosing Legacy as the March Book Club.
it was a very easy pick, if I'm being honest. I read the book in 3 days, and I was like, perfect for our community. So,
Thank you.
Dr. Uché Blackstock is an emergency physician based in Brooklyn, New York, the founder and CEO of Advancing Health Equity, and the author of New York Times bestselling Legacy: A Black Physician Reckons with Racism in Medicine. And if you want to join us at the book club, I have just posted a link to how you can find out everything we've got going on. Tomorrow night, we're actually doing a community meeting where just the readers can come together and talk about the book together. So if you want to join us there, sciencefriday.com/book club is the place to go. And we'll be still discussing the book on our community space. So I hope you all will join us there. Uche, once again, thank you so much for being here. Have a wonderful rest of your day.
Bye.
Bye, everyone. See you soon.